I wanted to talk about an ACT approach to relapse prevention. This is thinking about integrating ACT and ERP for OCD recovery. I like to think of this really as further recovery rather than relapse prevention. This takes into account that OCD recovery is really a skills-based approach that can only get better through time, but can have setbacks, and the path may not be a sort of linear progression. It might go up and dip a little, level out, then go up, much like physical fitness. So physical fitness, you don't just get stronger and fitter like this. It goes up, sometimes it levels out a bit, sometimes you even have a little injury or setback, or things get in the way of your training, and then you go back up. And I like to reflect this analogy really in OCD recovery work, like many people do. Many people like this physical fitness metaphor, and I think it's a useful one because it's very similar what we're trying to do. So this reframes relapses as learning opportunities, times we can actually deepen our skills if we take the right approach to how we're going to respond to them. So we might want to think about, lapses, relapses, and slips. So lapses tend to be we've gone backwards somewhat in our recovery, and it's significant enough to notice, but it's not right back to square one. Relapse is really a setback right back to the original level of suffering or worse, and slips might be momentary little episodes where we are slipping back into compulsions or mental compulsions, rumination, and not using our skills as well as we can. And I think all of these things will happen for everyone. If you talk to people about their OCD recovery journey, it's unlikely they haven't had lapses, relapses, and slips. I certainly had all of these in my difficult times. And now looking back on them, I do feel they were times that I've learned the most, and actually has prepared me for the future of my mental health as I face different challenges in life and ups and downs and suffering and all the things that can happen in a human life. So in the approach I take, where we are using ERP, but we're doing it with an emphasis on developing skills. So we are not just doing ERP as like a hammer to kind of hammer down OCD. We're more using it as a vehicle to develop psychological skills, to change our relationship with our mind to one where we are not going to get caught in this OCD cycle over and over again, because we've fundamentally changed how we interact with our thoughts and feelings and how we orientate to the things that matter to us in our lives. So the way we do this is we build up these skills. So we build up the ability to diffuse and acknowledge our thoughts, to step back and to not get caught up in them. If my thoughts are my hands, then I'm stepping back. OCD is like this. We're getting the ability to go like that, and then not add additional thinking in through rumination and compulsions, just to acknowledge and have some distance, and then engage in what we're doing. We're learning to accept difficult feelings, so to drop the struggle and make room for uncomfortable feelings, so that we're not adding in additional monitoring, checking, resisting, struggling, resentment, etc., towards our feelings. And then we can orientate and focus in the present moment. We're not distracted. We are more able to engage in the things that are important to ourselves and ultimately savor and enjoy our lives more. So we build up those skills, then we apply them in exposure, either imaginal exposures, written or thinking-based exposures, video-based exposures, or ideally life-based exposures, where we're identifying the things we're avoiding, that we care about, or the triggers that we're avoiding, and we go towards those and reclaim our freedom and our life. So we hopefully build this up in a systematic way. There might be other things we do: develop compassion, develop the ability to savor and appreciate life more, other things we might do as well, but generally building up those skills. And then we are in a place of recovery where we feel whatever level of obsession we're having, whether it's intense and persistent, or it's more transient and peripheral and less intense, we're able to accept and allow that to come and go without doing compulsions. Um, we're not doing the physical compulsions. We're not ruminating, analyzing, judging, and doing other mental compulsions or attentional compulsions: scanning, checking, threat monitoring. And instead, we are pursuing our values and goals and living the kind of life we want to live. And that's going pretty smoothly. At that point, we might do less targeted exposures, because really life becomes the exposure. We are trying to pursue the life we want to live. And that's actually the exposure itself, pursuing our values and goals in our relationships, our work, our hobbies and playtime, and our health and well-being domains of our life. I like this idea that Stephen Hayes talked about. One way of looking at when it's time to finish therapy is when actually we don't need to work with the therapist to learn the psychological flexibility skills. Instead, life becomes our teacher. So we're so in tune with our present moment and what's happening for us and how orientated to values we are, that becomes the teacher. So difficulty comes at it, how we respond, we learn from, we develop more skills when things are going well. We follow that more deeply, we get more engaged, we go more towards values. So really life becomes the teacher. And it doesn't mean we can't have difficulties. I mean, Stephen Hayes himself said he had tinnitus not that long ago, and actually it caught him out, and it was in some ways a bit like a relapse. He caught himself getting fused and caught up in his thinking and judgment of the experience, and had forgotten to apply ACT skills. And then he remembered, and then it led to some really excellent research on using ACT for tinnitus and deepening his acceptance and diffusion skills. So yeah, we're using life as the teacher, and there'll be ups and downs there. We're really trying to not avoid anything that's meaningful. And you might be free of OCD, but you still catch yourself avoiding things because of social anxiety, or avoiding embarrassment, difficulty, or kind of lack of motivation, and not full on depression, but a kind of lowered mood. You catch yourself avoiding because of these. You instead choose to go towards, and that becomes your exposure. Your friends invite you to some event, you're feeling knackered after a week at work and with your family, and yet you still decide to go, and you end up having a good time. So life provides lots of exposure opportunity. However, if you feel you really do have a lapse that puts you back into struggle with your OCD symptoms, with the obsessions and the urge to do mental compulsions or physical compulsions, and that is starting to distract and pull you from life, that could be the point to decide to recommit to working in a systematic way. I always advise people to keep going with skills even when they feel they're in recovery. And this is because these skills are not just about OCD, they're about making everything more rewarding in life. So learning how to diffuse from self-judgment, diffuse from depressive rumination, diffuse from worry, everyday life worry, diffuse from comparison and jealousy, envy, guilt, shame, other experiences, to work with the emotional components as well. So to work with anything difficult, also to orientate and take in the good and savor and appreciate life more. So we want to use our skills ongoingly, much like you don't just get physically fit and strong and give up. You maintain, and you maybe even deepen further, or you maintain for a period of time, ease off a little bit, you might lose some of it, and then you increase the training again and get fitter and stronger, or you hit your 40th, like I may have done recently, and you think, oh, I want to push my strength and fitness again. So it's a bit the same with the these psychological skills. We can kind of be in a maintenance stage, and we might not be practicing quite as intensely and using life more as the area to practice, or we might go, actually, I feel myself struggling with something other than OCD, like physical pain, or procrastination, or social comparison, or whatever. And we decide, okay, I'm going to work my skills and increase them there. So if we're doing that and we're really doing well, we should be quite resilient to setbacks in OCD. But never say never, and it is something people experience throughout their lifetime, and we're always going to be vulnerable to the OCD cycle. If we've had it, if we start responding to obsessions in the same way with compulsions and get caught back in that cycle, it can increase again. So we have to some degree maintain and work on it. We may always have more intrusive thoughts than your average person, and the urge to do compulsions than your average person. At the same time, we can work with all of that with general skills. But if you feel yourself go back, first thing to do is to go, is this at a level of intensity I need to go back into therapy? And if it is, just like you might go to a physio with an injury, or if it's an old injury that you're familiar with, you might know the physio protocol and you don't need to go back to the physio. So we have to sort of choose what level of intensity it is. And if we're in doubt, get in touch with your therapist and ask. There may be the options for top-ups, so not full-on therapy again, but a few top-up sessions, some reviews. My ACT skills for OCD recovery and ERP course is one option that I would see here, that you could go back into the group and do a 10-week group to refresh things. I'm also going to start a monthly check-in session where people can gather together online and practice skills and ERP together in this orientation and compassion work. So that might be another way to do it. Or you might check in with your peers and people you've worked on recovery and make a commitment together. You're going to start practicing again, much like you might go to your buddy, let's start going to the gym again in January and try and get in good shape again. If it's at a level where you know what's happening, you spot the OCD cycle and you think, I'm going to give it a shot at reactivating my skills and ERP practice and see if I can tackle this on my own, then we want to flow through what you did with your therapist. With me, we might go back to mapping out the OCD cycle. Has it shifted? Is it the same theme? What are the compulsions? Are there subtle compulsions we hadn't noticed? What are we doing in our mind? Can we identify the mental compulsions? So to really make sure we're clear upon the anatomy of OCD and the sequence and what's happening. And often this will happen when it switches theme, or you get a secondary spike. So OCD changes form in some way to pull us back into the compulsion. So really identifying that and where you're getting caught up, and you could draw it out. You can draw out the chain of obsession, urge to do compulsion, trying to implement skills. What happens when I do that? How does my brain resist it? And then can I work out how I would apply my skills on that reaction and that resistance? And once we've sort of got that clear picture of the OCD, okay, do I need to restart my skill practice? Is my diffusion needing deepening? Is my acceptance of feelings needing deepening? Is it urge surfing compulsions that needs deepening? So working out which part of my skills might be tripping me up. Is it verbal thoughts, images? Is it sensations and emotions in the body, or is it physical urges or urges to do things? Is it rumination and I need to go back to the dipping in and out the stream practices, things like that? So working out if any of my skills need strengthening, maybe not. Maybe it's just straight back into targeted exposure. Is it exposure to thoughts? Is it exposure to images or memories or visual triggers? Is it exposure to YouTube videos? Is it getting out in life and doing things that you've been avoiding, or being around people or scenarios or situations that cause more of the symptoms? And identifying your hierarchy again, drawing out, you might bring out the old hierarchies or create a new one if it's a new theme or new area, and then working through in a systematic way again and seeing where you get to, and maybe seeing if you can get yourself back to the place you were in before without needing the support of a therapist, of course, with the caveat that you're not in such intense suffering that you certainly need therapy. But if you feel you know what's going on, you can see the OCD cycle, it hasn't caught you out as a pattern, it's pulled you back into old brain loops and mechanisms. Can I work through that sequence, get myself into a good place again, and then I'm going to learn more in my own recovery if I can do that. But no shame if you need the support of a therapist or your psychiatrist or something like that, if you're using medication, whatever it might be. No shame in getting support and help with that. It's just if we're not in such an intense place, if we can become self efficacious in applying our skills and ERP methodology, it's going to build that trust really in our own ability for long-term recovery. If we go through this sequence a few times, we'll build confidence. I had it jump around different themes, jump between more puro things I'd experienced in the past to more existential themes and health anxiety, and sort of blending and twisting forms and different things coming up and challenging me, somatosensory stuff. It was dancing around a lot, and I had to go through this sequence with a few things. I also had it with depression. I had a lot of intense depression, and I also had some difficult withdrawal times from antidepressants, and I had to learn to do this method with everything and build it up with everything. And then having got through that, then feeling a lot more resilient to whatever form it could take, or different challenges in life, really more rather than OCD. So you may well have to go through this. Don't believe this sort of simple view of OCD recovery where it's like 16 sessions of ERP and you'll be fine forever. If you get out there in the OCD community, that's not people's experiences when they talk about long-term recovery and how they do well. Really it's much more skill-based, and it's more like fitness, and we can get injuries and we can get setbacks, and sometimes they are really tough. Well, they're always really tough. And we can also learn a huge amount through them and really strengthen, our resilience, and maybe learn things that weren't working so well in the way we approached it before. Just like an injury can teach me I had incorrect form when I was doing a certain exercise, and I need to build it back up from the bottom. And ultimately remembering that really these skills are more than just OCD recovery. They're about making our life richer, fuller, more meaningful, more able to enjoy and savor life without that triggering OCD and anxiety. So to be able to really be connected to our values and who and what matters to us, and to be present and focused and engaged in that, and for everything to get better because of that. So, it's not just about OCD recovery. So if you find yourself, you get bored, you're doing better and you're getting kind of bored with the practice, well, that's something to work with, that boredom, that restlessness, that irritation. I sat through a lot of that and learned a lot through getting a diffused accepting position on boredom. And it'll help you in areas of your life where you get bored and things are slower paced and more difficult. And really we want to see whatever comes up in the practice after we've reach recovery as something to work with and use. Other tools that I would use with relapse prevention is looking forward and looking for potential triggers. Are we going to face life stages, changes in circumstances, challenges, stresses? What are the things that might exacerbate anxiety and other symptoms, and being ready for that, ready with skills. I like to use the choice point to do this, which is an ACT tool, a Russ Harris tool. So you could look at the video on that and really thinking about, what would be the potential triggers going forward, and what would be the signs of away move, signs that compulsions are coming back, and what do I want to do instead? What are my values, goals, and things I want to move towards? So doing that with your therapist, or doing that to anticipate, am I going to be changing jobs? Am I having a family? Am I going through different age milestones? Am I going to be facing a loss or a difficulty, some sort of grief or something painful, and just being ready with our skills that possibly could trigger, OCD, and maybe looking at the wider picture of our mental health landscape, and what are the things feeding into it, the stresses, what are the interpersonal relationship challenges, what are the emotions we might struggle with, what aspects of our history might be feeding in, and trying to get a picture of that, and then anticipating stuff as we go forward. So that can be a useful step if we continue our practice and being ready for that pattern of OCD. So that feeling that tells us that we're struggling with an obsession and we're getting an urgency to fix it, to do compulsions, or we are being overwhelmed with intense anxiety when no one else around us is, worried about this thing, and there's nothing in our sensory experience that shows immediate threat or danger. We're getting caught up in over-analysis and doubt and needing to have certainty, or we're noticing ourselves struggle in some way that reflects that OCD cycle. Then, if we can spot that, have our skills ready, be ready to implement the kind of ideas we're talking about here, then we're going to be resilient in the long run. So hopefully some ideas here. Feel free to ask any questions. Really go back to your resources as well, your worksheets, your audio practices. If you've done the 10-week course, go back to week 1 and work your way through it. If you've done therapy with me, go back to your notes and the handouts and audio practices and things, and the YouTube channel, and just work your way through it all again. And don't believe your mind when it goes into hopelessness and worry and catastrophizing and helplessness about a setback. Actually, a setback is the most useful place for learning often. It was for me, and it can be for you too.